Hey y'all, welcome to the Southern Appalachian Herbal Podcast. I'm Judson Carroll and I'm an herbalist. I'm also a wild crafter, a gardener, and herb grower. I'm coming to you from high atop the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, just a stone's throw from the Tennessee line, overlooking the Pisgah National Forest, absolutely surrounded by the bounty of God's green earth. I spent most of my life wandering these mountains and learning about plants from the old timers and all sorts of characters. On this show, we'll talk about herbs and how to use them, how to find them, how to grow them, how to make preparations. We'll talk about a lot of things. We can also talk about permaculture, homesteading, foraging, and living off the land. Most anything, really. You can email me at southernappalachianherbs@gmail.com if you have a question or a comment. You can also contact me through the Grow Network, where I'm a regular contributor and a moderator for the forums. And my blog is, of course, southernappalachianherbs@blogspot.com. All right, y'all. I'm going to sit my guitar down and let's talk about herbs.
Hey y'all, welcome to this week's show. I guess this is the last show before Christmas, so let me just go ahead and wish everyone a very Merry Christmas. I hope you're spending it with your family and your friends and the people you love. And if you celebrate Hanukkah, I wish you an absolutely wonderful Hanukkah as well. Remember, my books make excellent Christmas gifts, and it's not too late. Amazon will still get it to you on time. At least they say they will. Or you can get it like directly from me as an ebook form, as a PDF if someone likes that. And you could even get that at the very last minute. I will check my emails quite a bit, Christmas Eve and even Christmas morning. And if you need to order an ebook as a last minute gift for somebody, please do so. And I'll email it to you right away and even send a nice little Merry Christmas note with it so they can get something personalized from the author. But physical copies are always available through Amazon. Had an interesting request for the show this week. Someone got in touch and said they were really enjoying the podcast. And could I talk about the medicinal benefits of their two favorite culinary herbs? Well, of course. You know I love food. You know I love to cook. And my new cookbook, The Omnivore's Guide to Home Cooking, uses so many culinary herbs that are also medicinal. My book, Growing Your Survival Herb Garden, talks a great deal about growing these herbs in your garden, not just for good food, which they will absolutely make for good food, but also for health. And my book, Herbal Medicine for Homesteaders, Preppers, Permaculture People, and everybody else, has a whole chapter on using culinary herbs for medicinal value. So never overlook your spice cabinet or your herb cabinet or your herb garden. And specifically, this person asked about two very common herbs, herbs I cook with quite a bit. I think they're probably more associated with Italian cooking than most other styles of cooking. And I mean, I absolutely love Italian cooking. I cook a lot of Italian food, really. Um, this is basil and rosemary. Well, let's talk about basil because it's really interesting. We'll start there because B comes before R, obviously. So let's start and let's look at the history of this herb. Now, basil has been used as a culinary and medicinal herb for as long as we know about food. I mean, as far back as we can trace in history, people were using it. There's a lot of reasons they may have begun using it. Basil is a good digestive herb. It eases flatulent stomach cramps, indigestion, and such. It's one of those herbs that was often mixed together with salt and other herbs to, and spices, you know, when people could get pepper and such, to cure meats, to keep them from spoiling as easily. But as far as its medicinal uses, let's look at the ancient Greeks. Dioscorides wrote basil as, I guess, Okimon, Okimon. I am not one who is very fluent in Greek, to say the least, but it's as close as I'm going to get to it. He said, eaten much, it dulls the eyesight, it softens the bowels, but removes flatulence, is uretic, and helps the flow of milk. He said it was hard to digest, and should be mixed with vinegar. It helps inflammation, helps with the strikes of poisonous fishes and scorpions. So venomous fish, like I guess a jellyfish or something, or a scorpion bite. Taken in wine, it's good for sores of the eyes. The juice takes away the dimness of the eyes and dries up excess fluids in them. Taken as a drink, the seed is good for those who breed depression, for those who are depressed. Frequent painful urination and flatulence. It causes considerable sneezing when smelled. I've never noticed that to be the case, but he thought it was. And the herb does the same. The eyes must be shut while sneezing. Some avoid it and do not eat it because when chewed and set in the sun, it breeds little worms. The Africans have used it because those who eat it and are touched by scorpions remain without pain. Okay, let's unpack this a little bit. Um, Obviously, that's an old legend that certain plants, as they decompose, would turn to worms. What was really happening was like flies had planted little eggs on the plant, or another insect had put little eggs on the vegetable or the fruit. And as it began to break down, those eggs hatched and little worms came out. Okay. But our ancestors, the ancients, thought they were actually magically appearing from the plant. You may also be surprised at his warning that it dims the eyesight. That was also a commonly held belief, which really has no truth to it. Uh, but that was the ancient Greek view of basil. By the time we get to the Middle Ages, St. Hildegard von Bingen thought it was a very good herb. She had found to use it. This is, 1080 to 1100 AD, probably the greatest herbalist ever lived. And, basil likes, well, it likes hot weather. It likes a Mediterranean climate. But here she was living in Germany in high elevation areas, and they took the trouble to grow basil because they found it to be a valuable herb in the apothecary. It was much used by the Benedictines and all the monastic medicine, the free hospitals and clinics, essentially run by the Catholic Church for um, 1500, 2000 years, which were the only hospitals in Europe, essentially. And they used herbal medicine, and they grew their own herbal medicine in physic gardens. She wrote Basil, a person who has a palsy in his tongue so that he is unable to speak, should place basil under his tongue, and he will receive speech. Also, one who has strong fevers, whether tertian or quartian, that means a fever would come every 3 days or every 4 days. That was very common with malaria and a few other conditions. Cook basil in wine with honey added. He should strain it and drink it frequently, with or without food. His fevers will cease. Now, by the time we get up to ancient British herbalism, we're talking around 1500s, 1600s. Basil was actually still a little controversial in the British herbal material medica. It was materia medica. There was no other medicine other than herbs at this time, even though Paracelsus was beginning to introduce some metals, and he was the father of toxicology as well as being a great herbalist. But really, at the time, in England, um, this herbal medicine was the medicine. That was it. So, and that was true for the rest of the world as well. The English tradition is very well summed up by Gerard and Culpeper and Parkinson as well, but I don't have my Parkinson book at my fingertips. Gerard, writing, I guess, in the 1500s, said of basil, he said there were two sorts of garden basil that they had access to at the time. There was also what they called a wild basil, and he actually listed five kinds of basil. But what we're really talking about here is what we call the sweet basil, the Ocimum incendium, I think. Anyway, Ocimum, just the same as Dioscorides called it. He said um, of basil, of course. He said basil in the Greek called Ocimum, Latin ocimum, differs from ocimum. He just goes through all these different names for it, which really don't mean a lot to us right now. He mentioned that Galen, that's another of the Greek herbalists, said that it was a hot herb, but that adjoined but that it hath joined with it a superfluous moisture. Now remember, this is Elizabethan English, so it can be a little hard to read. He said, by reason whereof he doth not like it, and said it should not be taken inwardly, but being applied outwardly is good to digest or distribute and to concoct. Well, all that means is really in Gerard's time in the 1500s, the English still weren't real big on eating basil. Honestly, if you look at traditional English cooking, you're not going to find a whole lot of basil in it, I mean, just to put it mildly. But medicinally, he mentions that Dioscorides had recommended it for stomach complaints. He said it mollifieth the belly, which means it soothes the stomach, and it provoketh the urine, drieth up the milk, and is hard to digest. Well, again, I eat basil, I eat it fresh, I have it on pizzas, I throw it in salad, I'll just grab a handful of it sometimes in the garden. Yes, they just were not used to eating basil, and maybe it does take a little time to get used to. I mean, give me some pesto and I'm happy. I love basil. Um, I bake homemade pizza probably, once a week, once every couple of weeks. Yeah, probably more like once a week. And I do my sourdough crust. I mean, it's all from scratch. And a lot of times I'll just do that classic margarita pizza, especially when the garden's coming in. Sliced tomato, basil, a little bit of garlic, just fresh leaves of basil, just kind of torn up on the pizza. Nice fresh mozzarella. Sometimes I'll throw some feta cheese on there too. That's very nice. Pop it in the oven, brown it up, and eat it. It's absolutely delicious. But like I said, in the 1500s, apparently the English had a hard time digesting basil. But he also mentions that the juice mixed with a meal of fresh parched barley, oil of roses, and vinegar is good against inflammations and stings of venomous beasts. The juice drank in wine is good against headaches. The juice cleanseth away the dimness of the eyes, and drieth up the humor that falleth into them. That would be mucus. That would be, you know, cloudiness essentially. And that's actually sort of the opposite of what Dioscorides had said. So at least by the 1500s, they had realized that basil didn't weaken the eyesight, which is probably a good thing. He said the seed drunk is a remedy for melancholic people. That actually was something Dioscorides had said. He also recommends it for those who are short-winded and them that can hardly make water, so it's a diuretic. If the same be snipped up the nose, it often causeth sneezing. Also the herb itself doth the same. I've never sniffed basil seed up my nose, but I can tell you the scent of basil does not bother my allergies. He said, there be some that shun basil and will not eat thereof, because that if it be chewed and lay in the sun, it engendereth worms. So from ancient Greece, 1500 years later, they still had not figured out that those were little insects that would hatch into worms or flies, maggots, whatever, from eggs that were already on the plant. And he also mentions what Dioscorides said about the Africans using it against scorpion bites. Now, one of the more interesting mentions, he says, is the later writers, among whom Simeon Zethi is one, do teach that the smell of basil is good for the heart and the head, and that the seed cureth the infirmities of the heart, taketh away sorrow, which cometh of melancholy, and make a man merry and glad. So apparently by, late 1500s, they were starting to catch on. And we get to Culpeper in the 1600s. He again mentions several types of basil, but he makes clear we're talking sweet basil or the garden basil, it was called at that time. He said the greater or ordinary basil. So by Culpeper's time, 1600s, apparently the controversy over basil had reached a peak in England. Because he mentions in his book, The Great Herbal, he says, this is the herb which all authors are together by the ears about, and rail at one another like lawyers. Galen and Dioscorides hold it as not fitting to be taken inwardly, and this is Chrysippus rails at it with downright Billingsgate rhetoric. Pliny and all the Arabian physicians defend it. So he's going back to the ancient Greeks and some of the Arab herbalists, and he says of himself, he says, "And away I went to Dr. Reason, who told me that the herb was of Mars and under the scorpion, and perhaps therefore called it basilicum, and it is no marvel if it carry a kind of virulent quality with it, being applied to the place bitten by a venomous beast or stung by a wasp or hornet. It speedily draws the poison to it. Every like draws his like. Mizaldus affirms that being laid to rot in horse dung, it will breed venomous beasts. Hilarius, a French physician, affirms upon his knowledge that an acquaintance of his, by common smelling of it, had a scorpion bred in his brain. Something is the matter with this herb, and rue would not grow with it together, no, nor near one another. And we know that rue is a great enemy to poison as any that grows. To conclude, it expelleth both birth and afterbirth, and as it develops deficiency of Venus in one kind, it spoils the actions in another. I dare write no more of it. So we have 1600s. I mean, this is the height of medicine at its day. Culpeper had taken the apothecary manuals and all the books of the doctors and translated them from Latin into English. And he thought that if you smelled basil, a scorpion could grow in your brain. I think we can say without a doubt the English were not very fond of basil, but getting up to a little more modern times, 1930s, Miss Grieve and a modern herbal kind of brought the British tradition up to speed, and of course dispelled those rather ridiculous myths. The English at the time were not known to be very fond of Italians or French or Greeks or their food or Spanish for that matter, and they just did not like a lot of Mediterranean herbs. So there is to it. So Miss Grieve brings us up to date, and she dispels a lot of the interesting myths about the basil. One of those myths had to do with the basilisk, I believe is how you pronounce it. This was sort of a mythical reptile or serpent, lizard kind of thing that was supposed to be able to kill you just by looking at you. And apparently, at one time, basil had been grown to kill or drive away the basilisk, and that superstition connected with scorpions. And anyway, she tries to kind of sort through it, but this is rather interesting. I just mentioned Gerard and Culpeper. Now, these were men that came after um, the Anglican Church. When King Henry declared himself the God's authority on earth because he got tired of cutting off his wives' heads and the Pope wouldn't allow him to have a divorce, he said, okay, that's it. I'm the King of England. In England, I'm the ruler, and everyone in England and our territories has to become Anglican now, has to renounce Catholicism. They went and they confiscated all lands that were owned by Catholics who would not renounce the church. They cut most of them's heads off or burned them alive. It was a huge prosecution, or persecution, I should say. And afterward, see all those hospitals and universities that had been run by the Catholic Church in England, uh, at that point for a good 1,000 years or so, a little bit longer, where highly educated men taught. I mean, this is like the era of Sir Thomas More. Okay, this was the height of learning and intelligence and sophistication in that era. Well, they got rid of all the educated Catholics, and into their place became sort of almost like a carpetbagger class. If you think of the Civil War, um, poorly educated, less educated um Protestants, and they became the doctors and the teachers. And we actually see a great loss of knowledge over 100 years' time. Parkinson, who was Catholic, he was the greatest herbalist in England. He was the king's physician, was one of the few Catholics who were not beheaded, even though he would not renounce the Catholic Church. That's how much he was respected. I mean, even Sir Thomas More was beheaded, the greatest lawyer in England. He wrote of basil. Very interestingly, this would be 50, almost 100 years before Gerard. he was quite familiar with basil. He was actually quite a botanist and a plant breeder and collector, as well as being the best physician in England and the best herbalist. He said the smell thereof, that's of basil, is so excellent that it is fit for a king's house. Or it may have been termed a royal herb because it was used in some regal unguent or medicine. Miss Gray says that Parkinson tells us that being gently handled, it gives a pleasant smell. So Parkinson was quite fond of the herb, which again kind of shows that that loss of sophistication, should we say, over that period of transition in England. And Miss Grieve talks a lot about how the basil was used in India. You know, the English had a large experience, we shall say, in colonizing India at the time, and had gotten a little bit more used to eating basil and recognizing it as as a medicinal. She says officially of basil, it is aromatic and carminative, settles the stomach essentially, and though generally employed in cookery as a flavoring, basil has been occasionally used for mild nervous disorders. For the alleviation of wandering rheumatic pains, the dried leaves in the form of a snuff are said to be a cure for nervous headaches. An infusion of the green herb in boiling water is good for all obstructions of the internal organs, arrests vomiting, and allays nausea. The seeds have been reckoned efficacious against the poisons of serpents, both taken internally and laid upon the wound. They are also said to cure warts. In common with other members of this family, essentially. Basil, basil, both the wild and the sweet, furnishes an aromatic, volatile, camphorous oil, and on this account is much employed in France for the flavorings of soups, especially turtle soup, and they use it in ragouts and sauces. Leafy tops are a great improvement to salads and cups. Well, what that means is they would course, put the herb in salad. Cups mean put a little bit in a glass of wine. And that's a nice kind of herbal infused wine. It's a nice way to kind of perk up maybe a little bit of a flat tasting wine. And I have never tried basil and turtle soup. Love, absolutely love turtle, but I may have to give that a try. Might be pretty good. I actually like to use sassafras. It's a little tip I got from an old man who said if you ever just want to just make the best turtle soup ever, put a little sassafras root in there. Sassafras is in the bay family, gives a really interesting flavor, but that's an aside. She even included a few recipes using basil. So obviously by the 1930s, probably thanks to England's experience in India, the uh, the attitude about basil had gotten a little bit more realistic. And in modern use, speaking specifically of sweet basil, Ocimum basilicum, sweet basil, this according to Plants for Future, sweet basil has been used for thousands of years as a culinary and medicinal herb. It acts principally upon the digestive and nervous system, easing flatulence, stomach cramps, colic, and indigestion. The leaves and flowering tops are antispasmodic, aromatic, carminative, digestive, galactagogue, stomatic, and tonic. Did I say any strange words there that I need to define? We can figure antispasmodic, aromatic, carminative, settles the stomach, digestive also settles the stomach, kind of gets rid of gas. That's what we're talking about. Galactagogue means it increases the flow of mother's milk. Stomatic, again, settles the stomach. Tonic, usually in this case, we're talking it helps appetite. The leaves are taken internally in the treatment of feverish illnesses, especially colds and influenza, for poor digestion, nausea, abdominal cramps, gastroenteritis, migraines, insomnia, depression, and exhaustion. Externally, they are used to treat acne, loss of smell, insect stings, snake bites, and skin infections. These can be harvested throughout the growing season and are used fresh or dried. The mucilaginous seed is given an infusion in the treatment of gonorrhea, dysentery, chronic diarrhea. It is said to remove film and opacity from the eyes. The root is used in the treatment of bowel complaints in children. Extracts of the plant are bactericidal, kills bacteria, in other words, and effective against internal parasites. The essential oil is used in aromatherapy. Its key word is clearing. So that pretty much brings us up to modern use on basil. Now, of course, you may have heard of Tulsi or holy basil. That is an Asian form of basil that is really interesting, much stronger. Also has a wonderful flavor. It's often grown in temples, or around temples, which is where we get the name holy basil. It has some adaptogenic type properties and seems to be strongly antiviral. So I would definitely recommend growing both herbs, both the culinary basil and the Tulsi holy basil in your garden. Now, when we get to oregano, this is a pretty interesting herb because it's often confused with marjoram. In the older books, we would usually see oregano actually listed as marjoram. In St. Hildegard's time, she listed in her writings the this would be the oregano, let's see, Oreganum marjorana, which was known as wild marjoram. Uh, Now we kind of separate it out. Linnaeus gave us some classifications, and we normally will consider marjoram and oregano different plants, though honestly they can look and taste quite a bit alike, depending on how and where they're grown and what variety you have. Um, the oregano we're looking at now is usually Oreganum vulgare. So you can see these are very closely related plants. In St. Hildegard's time, the oregano or wild marjoram was used for leprosy. Then Miss Greaves' time, about 1930s, but just to clear up any confusion over the old terms and the old books, which I love the old books and the old terms, but let's just look at the modern use of oregano because it really is a very important plant. I use oil of oregano as an antibiotic. I keep it on hand, um, and I use it whenever I think I might have a chance of an infection. Essentially, it's well. Let's see what Plants for the Future says. They say oregano has been used as a culinary and medicinal herb for thousands of years. It has a beneficial effect upon the digestive and respiratory system as well as used to promote menstruation. It should not be used medicinally by pregnant women, though it is perfectly safe in small amounts for culinary purposes. You may not think of oregano as a particularly strong herb, but oregano, especially the essential oil of oregano, is actually quite strong. It can really, taken in a concentrated form, it will burn your stomach and your tongue when you take it. It can irritate the skin, even if used uncut as an essential oil. Um, and it could definitely do great harm to a pregnant woman and her child. So you want to be a little careful with oregano, just as you would with mints and other members of this family. And taken in excessive doses or an unnatural form, they can be quite harmful. They can do you a lot of harm. I mean, just common mint, just common basil, just common oregano, yes, can actually be quite dangerous. But used in a natural form, as we would just use the herb in cooking, and oregano is one that actually tastes a little better, usually dried than fresh. I don't know why. I mean, cooking, but if you're adding it to a salad, you might want to use the fresh. If you're making a tea of the leaves, you could probably go either way. I would definitely dry it before tincturing it. But it's an excellent culinary herb. I mean, I don't make a tomato sauce without putting some oregano in there. The flavor, the smell, everything about it is just wonderful. But medicinally speaking, the leaves and flowering stems are strongly antiseptic, antispasmodic, carminative, cholagogue, diaphoretic, emmenagogue, expectorant, stimulant, stomatic, and mildly tonic. The plant is taken internally in the treatments of colds, influenza, mild feverish illnesses, indigestion, stomach upsets, and painful menstruation. It is strongly sedative and should not be taken in large doses, though mild teas have a soothing effect and help give a restful sleep. It should not be prescribed to pregnant women, as we discussed. Externally, oregano is used to treat bronchitis, asthma, arthritis, and muscular pain. The plant can be used fresh or dried. Harvest the whole plant, but not the roots, in late summer and dry and store for winter use. Oregano is often used in the form of essential oil that is distilled from the flowering plant. A few drops of the essential oil put on cotton wool and placed in the hollow of an aching tooth frequently relieves the pain of a toothache. This plant is one of the best natural antiseptics because of its high thymol content. The essential oil is used in aromatherapy to treat the same kinds of complaints that the herb is used for. This is one where the uses as essential oil are often very close to the uses as just a regular old internal or herbal. Very powerful plant, very good plant to grow. I would also recommend growing the marjorams and several members of these family. They're all good for you. They're all going to have immune supportive, antibacterial, anti-germ, if you want to look at it that way, properties. They're all good for the lungs. They're all good for the respiratory tract. They all seem to help with colds, sore throats, you name it. They all help with digestion, and they're all fairly easy to grow. Oregano likes definitely a warmer climate than where I live, but I can put in pots and take it in and out, or I can just kind of grow it seasonally, no problem. So I guess that about wraps it up today. Y'all have a very Merry Christmas. Um, Enjoy the everything about it. Just enjoy the holiday. Go to church. I mentioned last year, people love the story. I guess I'll tell it again of a really interesting Christmas mass I went to a few years ago. I was in a town. It was very much a resort town. People were coming in from all over the world for the holidays. And I went to mass. It was standing room only. Okay. The priest, one was Irish and one was African. I believe he was Nigerian. The Nigerian one was the one actually, ordaining over the mass. The Irish priest was more interested in the music, which tends to be the case for us Irish. And it was really just packed. And I'm standing at the back of the church with an African soccer team that just happened to be passing through on their way to a match, and they stopped in for mass. Around me, I see all colors of the rainbow. I mean, from local white folks to Asians from various Asian countries, Mexicans and South American countries. You got over there, you can see the Germans and like the Polish. You kind of recognize them because the little girls always wear veils, the more traditional Polish especially. Um, there were every accent in the world, packed into this church, jam packed. And the African priest says, he's wrapped everything up. He says, for the final hymn, let's sing Silent Night. And the music starts, and everybody started singing in their own language. You could hear German, you could hear Polish, you could hear, uh, Portuguese, Spanish, at least three different Asian dialects. I mean, all at the same time. English, of course. And everybody started singing, and then everybody stopped because they realized they were all singing in different languages. And it was kind of uncomfortable. And the priest, this Nigerian priest, just cracks up, big smile, big white teeth. And he says, no, do not stop. It is a joyful noise. Raise up a joyful noise unto the Lord. And everybody's singing together. Greatest Christmas mass I've ever been to. Family of God out in full force. So I hope y'all get to enjoy that this Christmas. And I wish you all, all the blessings possible. Have a good one.
The information in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any disease or condition. Nothing I say or write has been evaluated or approved by the FDA. I'm not a doctor. The U.S. government does not recognize the practice of herbal medicine, and there is no governing body regulating herbalists. Therefore, I'm really just a guy who studies herbs. I'm not offering any advice. I won't even claim that anything I write or say is accurate or true. I can tell you what herbs have been traditionally used for. I can tell you my own experience and if I believe an herb has helped me. I cannot nor would I tell you to do the same. If you use an herb anyone recommends, you are treating yourself. You take full responsibility for your health. Humans are individuals and no two are identical. What works for me may not work for you. You may have an allergy, a sensitivity, an underlying condition that no one else even shares and you don't even know about. Be careful with your health. By continuing to listen to my podcast or read my blog, you agree to be responsible for yourself, do your own research, make your own choices, and not to blame me for anything ever.